Good afternoon. I'm joined by my two colleagues who have been great advocates for preserving the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, and I want to thank both of them for their hard work and dedication on this very important issue. Today, 37 wildlife biologists who've been conducting research in the Arctic released a letter basically opposing Arctic National Wildlife drilling, because as they say in their letter, it is home to over a dozen polar bear, caribou, migratory birds, and other wildlife, and it's so important to our country. Their letter goes on to state how important it is as the refuge continues to see an influx of animals as they see degradation because of climate change, so important that they have the refuge to continue to find home. It's very important that we continue to preserve the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. Today, Senator Murkowski is releasing draft language that will be considered by the Senate next week that mandates leasing. It mandates that the drilling occur in a wildlife refuge by taking away the purposes of the refuge and instead stating that the purpose should be for drilling. Our colleagues spent a good deal of last week talking about how these two things could coexist. I guess they gave up on that idea. Clearly, scientists today say they can't coexist, but instead of admitting that they can't coexist and preserve, instead they want to change the law that mandates drilling and changes the status of the refuge to make sure that that drilling actually happens. We think these are bad ideas. I don't think that Boeing or Microsoft needs a tax break from on the corporate level by drilling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. This bill shouldn't be called polar bears or caribou for millionaires. It is about tax policy that should be considered on the basis of a regular order process and discussion. That is the way the language for the Arctic Wildlife Refuge was originally established, that any changes would go through regular order. So now here we are, just a week away from our colleagues not only changing the tax code to raise taxes on middle-class families, they're also destroying a wildlife refuge by mandating leasing in the Arctic. We think these are the wrong policies. They're the wrong policies. We don't want to see middle-class families have their taxes go up, and certainly from a state where the exemptions would be removed, this is very problematic. But I guarantee you that people do not need to ruin a wildlife refuge and an ecosystem that is intact just to give tax breaks to big corporations. We can do better than this, and I thank my colleagues for joining us. I'll turn it over to Senator Markey.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell, and we are so fortunate to have such a great leader on this issue. The Republican tax plan is all about massive handouts to the 1% and huge corporations while doing nothing for working and middle-class Americans. But if that weren't bad enough, they are trying to offset $1.5 trillion in tax cuts for the super-rich by raising $1 billion in revenue from drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. That is a fiscal plan that makes neither sense nor raises sufficient dollars and cents. Last night, the Republicans rolled out their reconciliation Arctic drilling bill, but in reality, trying to drill in the crown jewel of the wildlife refuge system is not about raising revenue. It is nothing more than a big oil polar payout. Rather than trying to drain the swamp, Republicans are bringing the swamp to the Arctic by trying to include this big oil giveaway in their tax package. To make a policy change of this magnitude and forever despoil such a pristine wilderness, such a bill should go through regular order. But this Republican drilling plan is about as far away from regular order as Alaska is from the U.S. Capitol. And why are they trying to circumvent the normal legislative process? Because they know they don't have the votes to do this on its own. And when you drill down on this Republican math on Arctic drilling in the tax bill, it adds up to even less. In order to raise the revenue, Republicans project would be generated by opening the Arctic Refuge to drilling, it would need to bring in 10 to 100 times the historical average of what oil companies have paid to drill in Alaska. The only thing fuzzier than the polar bears that call the refuge home is the Republican drilling mathematics. In reality, drilling in the Arctic Refuge is a budgetary dry hole. 2 years ago, we lifted the 4-decade-old ban on exporting American crude oil. As a result of that giveaway to big oil, we are now exporting more U.S. crude oil, nearly 1 million barrels a day, than we could ever produce from drilling in the Arctic Refuge. But now, the Republicans and their oil industry allies are coming back saying that we need to allow drilling in the wildest place left in America so that we can export even more oil to China and other foreign countries. These sort of corporate giveaways are the polar opposite of the kinds of policies we should be pursuing to help hardworking Americans. This Republican tax scam to hand over the wildest place left in America to big oil should be removed and put in the fiscal and historical dustbin so that the American people do not have to pay this huge price to make the oil industry happy. So now let me turn and recognize great senator from the state of Colorado, Michael Bennet.
I don't want to go after you. I just had a few thoughts. One is that it is now 1:30 on Thursday afternoon, and we have not seen a text of legislative language from the Finance Committee majority. And they are suggesting that the rumors we've heard are that amendments will be due on Sunday, that we'll have a markup on Monday. We have not had a single hearing on this legislation because the legislation has not been written. The American people have not had an opportunity to testify on it. Not a single economist in America has been able to give their opinion about it. We haven't heard from the American people or the private sector what they want out of a tax bill. This is not the way to do our legislative work. And every hour that goes by is one more hour when the American people are going to have the truth of what's in this legislation obscured from them. The second thing is that this is a terrible piece of legislation. Their effort to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is an effort to destroy one of our last national treasures. And people in Colorado believe we have a responsibility to protect our public lands. There are only 2 points I want to make about this. One is the point that Senator Markey made, which is, from a budget point of view, this makes absolutely no sense. The equivalent, if you had $10,000 of debt, the contribution that the drilling in the refuge would make to you is about $1. That's how small this is from the point of view of the budget, but it's huge from the point of view of the tribes and the wildlife and our national heritage, and it can never be replaced again. Second point I want to make, as a state that does produce natural gas and oil, and through the ingenuity of our industry, have been able to dramatically increase the production of oil and natural gas throughout Colorado and across the United States. We know that the price of oil and natural gas is far lower today as a result of that, and our exports are far higher today as a result of that than they were at a time when there was a bipartisan consensus that this refuge should be protected. And it's that bipartisan consensus that we should restore, especially at a moment when commodity prices are as low as they are today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my neighbor, my colleague, Tom Udall.
Okay, Michael. Just a couple of quick comments here. Senator Cantwell, thank you so much for your leadership sitting there on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and both Senator Markey and Senator Bennet for your leadership on this issue. And I agree with everything they said. The one little thing I'd like to add has to do with Senate Indian Affairs, where I'm the vice chair. One thing you do that you learn always about dealing with Native American tribes, there's a term called tribal consultation. Before you take some dramatic action, you consult with the tribe. Well, in this case, it's particularly damaging because the tribe, there are 9,000 members of the Gwich'in tribe, and the Gwich'in tribe lives exclusively off of this caribou herd, the porcupine caribou herd, which would be greatly disrupted by what they're trying to do up in this 1002 area, up in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. No consultation has taken place. They, as a part of their lifestyle and their subsistence lifestyle, they use every single piece of the caribou. And so these are frugal people. They're dedicated to sustenance living. And one of them came down, and many of them are here in town, but one came down and testified in Senator Cantwell's committee and made a passionate argument for why we should keep oil drilling out. The one final thing I would say, and Senator Markey mentioned this, so there was no consultation. Final thing I'd say, Senator Markey mentioned regular order. We've got to think a little bit of the history, why this has been preserved since 1980. My uncle in 1980 expanded the Arctic Wildlife Refuge dramatically by more than double. And in that compromise, the 1002 area was designated as an area that Congress had to specifically act in terms of oil and gas. That's not true on other federal land. You can have leasing that specifically designated as Congress had to act. And in the day when he did that, there wasn't this reconciliation being used, slip it in, don't have hearings, don't pay attention to this, don't really examine it in depth. And so he would be horrified if he was here today to think that great compromise that was put in place is being stuck in a tax bill where we don't know anything about it and very, very quickly move down the road to opening it up. So with that, I'm sorry, Maria, I'm going to have to leave to another event I had. So I'm going to leave all the questions, the tough ones, to you guys.
All right.
But thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Can you talk a little bit about the amendment strategy for the markup next week? What are you thinking in terms of what you kind of want to bring to that?
Well, as my colleague said, we don't think that this has been a, fair and open process. These two were asked to testify, given that they have been the leads on this legislation in the past. That was refused by the committee, and yet we had, I think, 3 or 4 of the electeds from Alaska there to testify. So in this process, we know that the deck is stacked as it is, and we will look for amendments that we think could possibly improve the process, but we are going to be very, very clear about the fact that this process is not regular order. It's not the intention, and the only way they can open up drilling, again, for something we don't believe is going to generate the revenue or is needed to give tax breaks to corporations, is by mandating it, mandating the leasing. So the questions we'll be raising are, what's next? What other wildlife refuges in America are you going to mandate drilling in? What other parts are you going to just roll over current environmental law and just say that you have to drill just to get revenue for the tax break? So we will be drawing those distinctions as part of this process. And if people, you're all probably a little too young to remember the last time that we went through this, but it is just a very big reflection on the fact that the only way that they've ever been able to get any place on this issue is by throwing out regular order process and trying to do things like, as they did before, stick it in the defense bill, thinking that people had to vote for it. So we're just going to be very clear about the fact that it is not a regular order process, and your area and your state might be next. Yes.
Doesn't your vote the other day on your amendment in the full Senate suggest you don't have the votes to remove this?
We don't know where everybody's going to be on a final vote. Ours was to send it back to the committee for that process of instruction. So we've talked to several members who now are saying, oh, I didn't realize this was the structure that we were giving Alaskans, basically, the opportunity to get well on the revenue that might come off of this, and that what was going to be left here. So I think there's a lot of discussion whether the oil would be exported or not has been one that draws people across the line. So I think there's a lot of different ways that now when the details come out that members might look at it differently.
What did you mean by Alaskans getting well?
The revenue split here would go to money for Alaskans to help in their state budget deficit. So the point is, I think our colleagues are understanding how that budget deficit is part of the motivation.
So I think the way CBO describes the revenue, which you just referred to as well, 1.1 billion would go to the state, 1.1 would go to the federal purse. So a lot of environmental groups and even some industry supporters have expressed skepticism over the interest in ANWR, but is there a reason to be skeptical of that CBO assessment?
Well, I think there's lots of things that would follow on that you could say by mathematics that people wouldn't be interested, but we think this sets very bad precedent. We think it's very bad politics to try to mandate where leasing and drilling happens in general, and that it's a bad idea to do in a wildlife refuge. It seems very reminiscent of the FERC order that's out there that, okay, if coal can't make it on its own, we're going to mandate that FERC pass an order that says that coal has to be the resilient source. We would rather people follow what is a regular order process. So if they've made investment in Colorado or New Mexico or somewhere else, they're not all of a sudden going to get an administration that's going to change the economics of that by all of a sudden, opening and mandating it happen where they don't have to follow the environmental rules. So we think that that's changing the game in the middle of the road for industry as well, and we think that doesn't make sense.
Can you just talk a little bit more about your strategy to try to kill this, where the pressure points are throughout the process in the House even?
Hope that you guys are such prolific writers that the public awareness is.
But where are the key kind of, moments in this process where you think you can?
Listen, I know it's a busy news cycle we live in, but last time this issue captured the public's attention, and it's been out of the public's attention for a long time. So we're up here today because people need to understand that this is buried into this big tax proposal. I think Senator Bennet did a really good job of articulating all the problems, and so I know this one keeps probably falling down in the hierarchy, but yet we won't get it back. I guess that's the thing. We won't get it back. The notion that we could be this close to losing something so unique in the United States of America as such an unbelievable treasure, and then it could be lost just because it gets buried, 10 down in an egregious story about all the crazy ideas in a tax bill that we don't even know what it is yet, is just one of our biggest challenges. So we really sincerely hope that there is a way that we can illuminate for the American people that this choice is being made without little attention, and that it is going to have forever ramifications. And we see that both Democrats, Republicans, and independents all like the notion of keeping something as unique as this in the United States. They all support that concept. So we have to get the word out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Maria.